The precipitation descended, as though tears shed from the sky on the occasion of Michael's burial service. I remained there, my dark attire damply affixed to my form, observing the descent of the polished wood coffin into the earth. My spouse of a decade and a half was irrevocably gone, claimed by a cardiac event at the age of 42. Prematurely, everyone concurred, too abruptly. I was desensitized. The anguish had manifested as a tangible entity, residing heavily within my chest, impeding respiration. For a succession of days, I had traversed our residence like a specter, contacting his possessions, inhaling his residual aroma on his bed linens, pondering the feasibility of existence proceeding in his absence. The burial ground was populated with individuals I recognized, associates from his financial institution, local residents, acquaintances we had cultivated throughout the passing years. The majority averted their gaze. Subsequently, I would speculate whether they possessed prior knowledge of what I was on the cusp of uncovering. As the officiant concluded his concluding benediction, my sister-in-law Julia, Michael's step-sibling, approached. Her impeccably coiffed blonde tresses remained impervious to the precipitation beneath her parasol. Her demeanor towards me had consistently been frigid, yet the expression in her oculars that day transcended the customary scorn. An additional element was present: triumph. "I require a conversation with you," she articulated, her vocalization barely exceeding a murmur. "Pertaining to Michael's testament." I assented, presuming this pertained to funerary arrangements or administrative tasks. Michael had invariably managed our monetary affairs. He had insisted upon it. "I shall attend to all matters," he would declare with that comforting smile that had initially captivated me. And I had reposed unwavering faith in him. Julia deferred until the modest gathering had dissipated, leaving solely immediate relatives proximate to the interment site. Subsequently, she positioned her hand upon her abdomen, a gesticulation I had overlooked until that juncture. "The progeny I carry is his," she declared, her articulation sufficiently distinct for Michael's maternal figure to perceive. "He has bequeathed all his holdings to me." The cosmos ceased. I fixated upon her, endeavoring to comprehend her pronouncements, anticipating a jesting disclosure, a cruel hoax. Yet none materialized. I redirected my attention to Margaret, my maternal figure-in-law, anticipating an expression of astonishment, seeking an ally in this tribulation. Instead, she advanced, her oculars as glacial as the precipitation permeating my garments. "I personally ensured your disentitlement to any inheritance," she declared, her vocalization devoid of any trace of compunction. "Michael finally perceived your true nature, a mercenary who never merited him." My lower extremities nearly succumbed beneath me. The perfidy incised more profoundly than the bereavement. A decade and a half of matrimony, of constructing a shared existence, of cherishing an individual I believed I comprehended, all a fabrication. And remarkably, his maternal figure had consistently foreseen this denouement. My recollection of the journey homeward is non-existent. My recollection of the subsequent days is largely absent. I traversed not our dwelling, it transpired, contacting his possessions, endeavoring to comprehend how the individual I had cherished could have betrayed me so comprehensively. The legal notifications arrived 3 days hence: an eviction directive, depleted financial accounts, invalidated credit instruments. The existence I had known was undergoing systematic obliteration, as though I had never been. I reclined upon my bed, encompassed by the vestiges of our shared existence, when my mobile device resonated. It was James, Michael's enduring companion and legal counsel. "Elena," he articulated, his vocalization strained. "We necessitate a discourse, not via telephonic means. Convene with me at the Blue Cafe tomorrow at 2 p.m. Arrive unaccompanied and maintain discretion." Prior to my posing an inquiry, he terminated the connection. I remained, fixating upon the instrument, pondering what further disclosures awaited, what further losses I could sustain. I was then oblivious to the fact that the funerary service was merely the commencement. I was oblivious to the fact that the somber vehicle approaching Margaret's residence the subsequent week would effectuate transformative alterations. And I was certainly oblivious to the fact that Michael had bequeathed me a final endowment. Verity. The Blue Cafe was virtually unoccupied upon my arrival. James occupied a corner booth, his customary self-assured comportment superseded by an emotion I had never previously witnessed: apprehension. His digits tapped restlessly upon a manila envelope positioned before him. "I have served as Michael's legal representative for 2 decades," he commenced as I settled into the booth, but more significantly, I was his confidant. He propelled the envelope in my direction. He entrusted this to me 6 months prior, stipulating that, should any misfortune befall him, I should defer its delivery to you until post-interment. My extremities trembled as I unsealed it. Within resided a USB storage device, a key of unfamiliar design, and a handwritten missive. "Peruse it," James urged, "but not here." I folded the epistle and restored all contents to the envelope. "Elucidate the current situation, James. Why did Julia assert paternity of the child? Why did Margaret facilitate my exclusion? None of this is logical." James surveyed the establishment before leaning closer. "Michael harbored suspicions of malfeasance within the organization. Substantial sums. He was approaching the identification of the perpetrator." His vocalization diminished further. "The cardiac event, Elena. I harbored doubts regarding its natural origin." The environment seemed to incline. "Are you insinuating that someone perpetrated homicide against my spouse?" "I am advising caution. Peruse the epistle, employ the key, and repose trust in no one, particularly not familial relations." He arose precipitously. "I have divulged excessive information. I am departing this locality tonight, and I advocate your contemplation of a similar course." At my dwelling, during the limited days remaining prior to eviction, I perused Michael's epistle with tremulous hands. "My dearest Elena, if you are perusing this, my apprehensions were substantiated. I am profoundly remorseful for the tribulations you are currently enduring. All that you are being informed is mendacious. Julia and I never engaged in an amorous liaison. The progeny is not mine. However, I was compelled to engender their credence. I was participating in their stratagem to amass substantiation. 3 years prior, I unearthed fiscal irregularities within the organization. An individual has been diverting millions into clandestine accounts. Upon my discreet investigation, all indicators implicated a singular individual: my maternal figure. She has been exploiting the familial enterprise to subsidize a surreptitious existence, and Julia is her accomplice. When they discerned my awareness, they initiated their machinations. I feigned complicity, feigning infatuation with Julia, feigning disaffection with you. It was the most arduous undertaking of my existence, yet I necessitated corroboration. That corroboration resides on the USB storage device. The key unlocks a secure repository at First National Bank, vault number 247. Within resides all that you will require to substantiate your legitimate proprietorship of our assets and to expose their machinations. I cherish you immeasurably. I never betrayed you, not in my affections. Kindly pardon the anguish this has engendered. Eternally yours, Michael." I perused the epistle thrice, tears obscuring the script. Solace and indignation suffused me in equal proportions. Michael had not betrayed me. He had been endeavoring to safeguard me and bring his kin to justice. And they had, in all likelihood, assassinated him for it. The subsequent morning, I proceeded to the financial institution. Within the secure repository resided that which Michael had pledged: documentation substantiating the authentic proprietorship of our dwelling and accounts, corroboration of the malfeasance, and an additional item: a secondary epistle. Elena, if circumstances have progressed to this juncture, it signifies my demise. However, you are not compelled to confront this alone. Contact Detective Sarah Clark. We have been collaborating to construct a case. Inform her that the avian creature has shed its plumage. She will comprehend. Remain resilient. You have consistently possessed greater fortitude than you acknowledged. Michael. I contacted Detective Clark that afternoon. Her vocalization was curt, professional, until I uttered the designated phrase. Subsequently, a protracted silence ensued. Mrs. Smith, she eventually articulated, I have been anticipating your communication. We necessitate a meeting. That evening, as I packed a compact valise, taking solely that which was indispensable, I peered through the window and observed a vehicle stationed across the thoroughfare. An individual was observing. I extinguished the illuminations and exited via the rear entrance, my cardiac organ pounding with such intensity that I feared it might rupture. I possessed no certainty regarding whom I could trust, yet one certainty remained. I would not permit their evasion. For Michael, for myself, for Verity. What I remained oblivious to was that Margaret's meticulously constructed realm was on the precipice of disintegration. And when that somber vehicle approached her residence the subsequent week, her countenance would display the singular emotion I had never previously witnessed: unadulterated terror. Detective Sarah Clark's residence was austere and utilitarian, mirroring the woman herself, with her incisive oculars and pragmatic demeanor. She evoked recollections of the formidable female investigators I had encountered in crime dramas, save that this was not a televised production. This was my existence. Michael approached me 8 months prior, she declared, disseminating photographs across her culinary table. He harbored suspicions of illicit financial transactions through the organization, substantial sums. We have been meticulously constructing a case, yet we were not prepared to proceed. Her oculars met mine. I regret our inability to apprise you. Michael insisted on your exclusion for your safeguarding. The photographs depicted Margaret convening with individuals unfamiliar to me in vehicular storage facilities, dining establishments, and, on one occasion, aboard a private nautical vessel. In some, Julia was present, elegant and composed as invariably, her smile deliberate. Your maternal figure-in-law possesses affiliations with organized criminality, Clark continued. The Vasquez Syndicate specifically. They have been employing Smith Investments to cleanse their funds for years. Michael unearthed this upon assuming control of his CFO 3 years prior. The environment seemed to gyrate. But Margaret never desired Michael to assume the role of CFO. She opposed it. Precisely, Clark assented. She apprehended that he might unearth her machinations. When he did, he engaged in a perilous stratagem, feigning corruptibility, feigning a desire to participate in the scheme. He even feigned infatuation with Julia's advances. And they were persuaded. Not entirely. That is why they persisted in testing him, compelling him to substantiate his fidelity. The ultimate test was the transfer of assets to Julia and your exclusion. Clark's vocalization softened marginally. He was endeavoring to safeguard you by engendering their belief in his disaffection. If they believed you possessed no knowledge, they would refrain from harming you. I fixated upon a photograph of my spouse, mirthful with Julia, his arm encircling her midsection. Even acknowledging its fabricated nature, it engendered anguish. We suspect they discovered his collaboration with us, Clark declared. The medical examiner detected traces of a substance in his system that could have precipitated the cardiac event. It is not conclusive, but they perpetrated homicide, I articulated flatly. Clark offered no denial. Instead, she gestured towards the USB storage device on the table. This encompasses transaction records, account designations, communications. It suffices to initiate legal proceedings, yet we necessitate additional evidence for a secure conviction. We necessitate an individual on the interior. The gravity of her pronouncements permeated gradually. You desire me to assume that role? She assented. You possess ample justification for your current indignation. They anticipate that. Exploit it. Return, Contest for your rightful possessions. Generate commotion. While you do so, we require you to locate a specific item. She propelled a photograph in my direction. Margaret's personal portable computer. Michael believed it encompasses direct substantiation of her communication with the Syndicate. She will never permit my proximity to it. No, Clark concurred, but she might permit your proximity to the dwelling to retrieve your belongings. A singular opportunity is all we necessitate. That night, sleep eluded me. Each time I closed my oculars, I envisioned Michael's countenance, envisioned his final moments, pondered whether he comprehended his fate. Had he vocalized my name? Had he endeavored to leave a message? The contemplation of him expiring in solitude, betrayed by his own kin, was nearly unbearable. The subsequent morning, I reached a determination. I would not merely be a passive participant in Clark's inquiry, I would assume command of my own narrative. I contacted my dwelling and communicated with Maria, the domestic attendant, who had consistently demonstrated benevolence towards me. When Margaret answered, her vocalization was frigid. "What is your desire, Elena?" "I desire that which is rightfully mine," I declared, infusing as much venom into my articulation as I could muster. "My attire, my personal effects, unless you desire my presence with legal representation, creating a spectacle before your affluent acquaintances." A protracted silence ensued. "You may arrive tomorrow at 10 a.m. for a duration of 1 hour. Maria will oversee you." Acceptable. I terminated the connection prior to her response. My hand remained tremulous as I contacted Clark to apprise her of the initiated plan. 1 hour is insufficient, I declared. "It will suffice," she responded. "But Elena, exercise caution. These individuals are perilous." The subsequent day, I proceeded to the residence I had shared with Michael. For the preceding decade, the abode where we had contemplated establishing a family, where we had commemorated anniversaries and nativities, where I had last beheld him sentient. Now it resembled a mausoleum to our defunct aspirations. Maria unlatched the portal, her oculars rubescent. "Mrs. Smith," she murmured, glancing over her shoulder, "I am profoundly remorseful." I clasped her hand in silent gratitude and entered. The dwelling possessed a different aroma, Julia's overpowering perfume lingering in the atmosphere. I could perceive her vocalization emanating from the study, Margaret's responding in subdued tones. They was both present. My pulse accelerated. The plan had been for me to infiltrate Margaret's bedchamber while Maria occupied her in the culinary area, yet with both women in the residence, the peril had doubled. I commenced in our bedchamber, placing attire into valises, personal effects into receptacles. All the while, I maintained auditory vigilance of the movements within the dwelling. 20 minutes elapsed, then 30. Finally, I perceived that which I had been anticipating. Julia's vocalization escalating in exasperation, followed by the sound of the frontal portal slamming. One vanquished, one remaining. 5 minutes subsequently, Maria materialized in the doorway. "Mrs. Margaret is requesting my preparation of coffee," she declared meaningfully. "I shall be exceedingly deliberate, a minimum of 10 minutes. I nodded in comprehension. Gratitude, Maria. As soon as she departed, I proceeded down the corridor to Margaret's chamber. The portable computer was not on her desk or her nightstand. I searched discreetly, methodically, acutely conscious of the elapsing minutes. Not in the closet, not in the drawers. Consternation began to escalate. Where would an individual like Margaret conceal something cherished? Then I recalled something Michael had once mentioned casually. His maternal figure's obsession with security had extended to the installation of a diminutive safe behind her vanity mirror. Paranoid. He had termed it then. Now I comprehended why. I located the latch and swung the mirror forward. There it resided, a diminutive digital safe. Now I necessitated the combination. My hands were perspiring as I contemplated which numerals Margaret might employ. Her nativity? Too obvious. Michael's? The company's founding date? I attempted several combinations, my anxiety escalating with each failed endeavor. Then, I recalled the date inscribed within Margaret's wedding band. October 17th, 1975. 101775. The safe clicked open. Inside resided the portable computer, several passports, and a diminutive handgun that caused my blood to congeal. I took solely the portable computer, closed the safe, and replaced the mirror. I had just returned to the bedchamber when I perceived Margaret's vocalization. "Where is she? Her hour is nearly concluded." My cardiac organ pounding, I slipped the portable computer into one of my receptacles and concealed it with photographic albums. I was folding a garment when Margaret materialized in the doorway. "Time has expired," she declared, her oculars narrowing as she surveyed my packed belongings. "That is more than sufficient." "These are my possessions," I declared, permitting my vocalization to fracture, portraying the devastated widow with minimal difficulty. "Items Michael bestowed upon me." "Michael," she scoffed. "My offspring was an imbecile concerning you, invariably was." Something within me fractured. Why did you harbor such animosity towards me from the inception? What transgression did I ever commit against you? Margaret's countenance hardened. "You abducted him from me, engendered his questioning of matters that were none of his concern. If you had merely been the compliant spouse, performed your designated role—" "You intend, if I had averted my gaze while you exploited his organization for illicit financial transactions, while you corrupted and manipulated him, while you—" I halted, realizing belatedly my disclosure. Margaret's oculars widened, then narrowed menacingly. "What did you just articulate?" Her vocalization barely exceeded a murmur. Prior to my response, Maria materialized. "Mrs. Margaret, an individual awaits you at the entrance. Law enforcement, I believe." The hue drained from Margaret's countenance. For a moment she remained frozen, then pivoted and strode swiftly from the chamber. I seized the opportunity, grasping my receptacles and hastening towards the rear entrance. As I loaded all items into my vehicle, I perceived elevated vocalizations from within the residence. I did not defer to ascertain the occurrences. As I departed, my hands tremulous on the steering wheel, I was oblivious to the fact that I had just initiated a chain of occurrences that would expose decades of malfeasance, annihilate a potent familial entity, and ultimately lead me back to the verity regarding the individual I had espoused, and that the contents of that portable computer would disclose secrets far more sinister than I could have envisioned. "We have apprehended them." Detective Clark's vocalization was strained with exhilaration as she perused files on Margaret's portable computer. We were situated in a motel chamber on the periphery of the locality, where Clark had established a provisional base of operations. 2 additional investigators labored discreetly in the corner, occasionally exchanging glances as they unearthed novel information. "Transaction records, contact listings, meeting schedules. It is all present." Clark peered up at me. "You performed admirably, Elena, exceedingly admirably." I should have experienced triumph. Instead, I experienced hollowness. "Will it suffice to substantiate their culpability in Michael's demise?" Clark's expression sobered. "That is more intricate. The substantiation of their fiscal transgressions is overwhelming, yet homicide is more challenging to prove. We shall persist in our endeavors." I nodded, fixating upon my hands. Since absconding with the portable computer 3 days prior, I had been residing at this motel under law enforcement protection. My existence had been diminished to a diminutive chamber with faded draperies and a mattress that sagged in the medial region. Each time I closed my oculars, I envisioned Michael's countenance. "There is an additional matter," Clark declared, her tone prompting my attention. "Something we did not anticipate unearthing." She rotated the portable computer in my direction. On the screen was a folder labeled simply, "Smith." Within resided hundreds of files, surveillance photographs, banking records, personal electronic communications, not solely of Margaret and Julia, but of Michael as well, and me. We suspect your maternal figure-in-law was undergoing extortion, Clark elucidated, by an individual within the syndicate. They possessed leverage over her, and that is why she was unable to terminate the illicit financial transactions, even had she desired to. What leverage? Clark hesitated. Elena, this is not facile to hear, but, according to these communications, Margaret was not the originator of the illicit financial transactions. It was Albert, Michael's paternal figure. The disclosure impacted me like a tangible blow. Albert Smith, the patriarch whose portrait still adorned the corporate lobby, had been deceased for 12 years. He had been venerated, almost sanctified in familial lore, the self-made individual who constructed an empire from naught. That is not feasible, I stammered. The substantiation suggests otherwise. Albert became entangled with the Vasquez Syndicate 2 decades prior, when the organization was on the precipice of insolvency. He forged a pact with the Infernal to salvage it. Clark's oculars were compassionate. When he expired, Margaret inherited his secrets. She has been endeavoring to safeguard the familial legacy ever since, by perpetrating transgressions, by potentially assassinating her own offspring. I am not justifying it, Clark declared swiftly. I am merely elucidating the context. When Michael commenced his inquiry, he was jeopardizing all that she had sacrificed to safeguard. In her perception, he was the betrayer. I arose precipitously, pacing the diminutive chamber. So what transpires now? We are apprehending them, Margaret, Julia, and several executives at the organization who were implicated. With the substantiation on this portable computer, we possess sufficient grounds for search warrants, telephonic surveillance, the entirety. She paused. Yet a singular component remains absent. We necessitate identification of the individual within the syndicate who was collaborating directly with the Smiths, someone of elevated status with access to both realms. And you suspect I can assist with that? I suspect you might recognize a nomenclature or a countenance that possesses no significance to us. Clark extracted a stack of printed materials, photographs and documents from the portable computer. Allocate some time to these. Ascertain if anything distinguishes itself. That night, I disseminated the pages across my bed, scrutinizing each one. The majority were familiar. Business associates, familial acquaintances, corporate events. Nothing appeared anomalous until I reached a photograph from a philanthropic gala 3 years prior. There, standing beside Margaret, was a countenance I recognized but could not immediately place. Tall, distinguished, with argent hair and a politician's smile. I had encountered him previously, but where? I searched through additional photographs until I located another one, this time at our residence, at the Yuletide gathering. Michael and I had hosted the preceding year. The individual was in the background, raising a goblet in Margaret's direction. I recalled now. Martin Reed, a fiscal consultant who occasionally performed services for the organization. He had consistently been courteous to me, if somewhat aloof, yet something about his presence in these photographs troubled me. Why would a consultant be present at familial gatherings? And why did he appear in so many photographs with Margaret? On a hunch, I searched the portable computer files for his nomenclature. What returned caused my blood to congeal. Dozens of electronic communications between Margaret and Martin, some dating back 15 years. In them, they discussed not solely business, but personal matters, intimate matters. One electronic communication from the preceding year captured my attention. Margaret had inscribed, "M is approaching excessive proximity. We necessitate a determination regarding our course of action." The response, "Permit me to address it. I possess contacts who can effectuate the disappearance of complications." My hands trembled as I contacted Clark. "I believe I have unearthed something," I declared when she answered. "Martin Reeves, he's—" "Wait," she interrupted. "Articulate nothing further via telephonic means. I am en route." 20 minutes subsequently, Clark was fixating upon the electronic communications, her expression somber. "Martin Reeves," she declared. Fiscal consultant, esteemed community member, sits on the board of 3 philanthropic organizations. She peered up at me. And according to our intelligence, he is also Diego Vasquez's relative. He has been the Syndicate's operative in the legitimate business realm for years. He and Margaret were engaged in an amorous liaison, I declared, still endeavoring to process it all. Clark assented. It appears that way, and from these electronic communications, it seems they were conspiring against Michael collectively. She gathered the printed materials swiftly. This alters circumstances. Reeves is perilous, connected. We necessitate immediate action before he discerns our awareness. What does that signify for me? It signifies your lack of security here, if Reeves suspects your possession of this information. She did not necessitate completion of the thought. Pack your belongings. We are relocating you to a secure location tonight. As I hastily thrust a tire into my valise, a text message arrived from an unfamiliar number. We necessitate a discourse regarding Michael. Convene with me at the antiquated boathouse midnight. Arrive unaccompanied. I fixated upon the message, my cardiac organ racing. The antiquated boathouse had been a cherished location for Michael and me, where he had proposed, where we had expended countless summer afternoons. Few individuals were cognizant of its significance to us. I displayed the message to Clark. Her countenance darkened. Absolutely not. It is almost certainly a deception. But what if it is not? What if it is an individual with information pertaining to Michael's demise? It is not worth the peril, Clark insisted. But as we prepared to depart, I could not dispel the sensation that I was overlooking something significant. An individual had contacted me, specifically mentioning a location known solely to those intimate with us. What if it was Maria, or another employee from the residence who possessed information but was apprehensive about contacting law enforcement? When Clark exited to receive a call, I reached a determination that would alter all. I absconded via the rear entrance of the motel chamber and procured the spare vehicle key Clark had left on the table. The antiquated boathouse was situated on the lake outside of town, approximately a 20-minute drive. As I accelerated through the obscurity, I reassured myself that I was not acting recklessly. I was finally assuming control, finally undertaking action instead of merely reacting to surrounding events. Yet, as I approached the darkened edifice, doubt began to infiltrate. The lake was eerily tranquil, reflecting the crescent moon overhead. The boathouse stood like a sentinel at the water's periphery, its weathered wood silvery in the moonlight. I parked at a distance and approached on foot, remaining within the shadows. No other vehicles were discernible. No illuminations shone from within the boathouse. Had I committed a grave error? Just as I was on the verge of retreating, I perceived a familiar vocalization behind me. I was uncertain of your arrival. I pivoted. Standing there, her countenance half concealed in shadow, was Julia. What is your purpose here? I demanded, taking a step backward. The identical purpose as yours, she declared, seeking elucidations. She advanced into the moonlight, and I could perceive her countenance distinctly now. She appeared fatigued, frightened, not at all like the self-assured woman who had delivered her pronouncement at Michael's funerary service. The law enforcement officials arrived from Maternal Figure yesterday, she continued. They apprehended her. I barely evaded capture. I have been concealing myself ever since. Why should I care? Because I am not with child, she declared bluntly. There is no progeny. It was all a fabrication. Maternal Figure's notion to inflict anguish upon you, to deter your inquiries regarding the testament. Her vocalization fractured marginally. And because I possess knowledge of Michael's assassin, it was not Maternal Figure, it was Martin. I fixated upon her, endeavoring to discern deception in her countenance. Why are you divulging this to me now? Because I cherished my sibling, she declared, her oculars brimming with tears. I complied with Maternal Figure's stratagems. Because I harbored apprehension towards her. because I have invariably harbored apprehension towards her, yet I never desired Michael's demise. Never. She extracted something from her pocket, a diminutive flash drive. This encompasses substantiation, recordings of Martin deliberating the particulars with one of his subordinates. I procured it from his office yesterday when I discerned that all was disintegrating. She extended it to me. As I reached for it, headlights suddenly swept across the lakefront. A somber SUV was approaching rapidly, its engine growling in the tranquil night. Julia's oculars widened with terror. "They have located me," she gasped. "Flee!" I hesitated for a mere second before grasping the flash drive and sprinting towards the arboreal area behind me. I perceived car doors slamming, male vocalizations shouting. A gunshot resonated through the night. I fled blindly through the wooded area, branches lacerating my countenance, my pulmonary organs burning. I could perceive pursuit behind me, ponderous footsteps, additional shouts, another gunshot, this one nearer. Abruptly, the terrain disappeared beneath my feet. I tumbled down a precipitous embankment, landing forcefully on my side at the base. Pain radiated through my coastal region, yet I compelled myself to persist. Crawling into the dense undergrowth, I lay there, scarcely respiring, as footsteps approached. Flashlight beams swept the vicinity. Male vocalizations conferred in subdued tones. One voice, cultured and commanding, I recognized. Martin Reeves. "Locate her," he commanded. "She cannot have proceeded far." The search persisted for what felt like an eternity. Eventually, the vocalizations receded. The flashlights vanished. Yet I dared not move. Dawn was breaking by the time I finally crawled from my concealment. Every muscle protested in agony. I was disoriented, injured, and solitary in the wooded area. My mobile device was absent, likely lost during my descent. I possessed no means of summoning assistance, no notion of which direction would lead me to safety. All I possessed was a flash drive clutched in my hand and the escalating certainty that I was now entangled in something far more perilous than I had envisioned. And somewhere, back at that boathouse, was Julia, who might be deceased due to her endeavor to assist me. What I remained oblivious to then was that the recording on that flash drive would do more than implicate Martin Reeves in Michael's homicide. It would expose a conspiracy that extended into the most elevated echelons of local governance, the law enforcement department, and beyond. And it would place me directly in the crosshairs of individuals who had already demonstrated their willingness to perpetrate homicide to safeguard their secrets. I stumbled through the arboreal expanse for hours, disoriented and aching. Each sound elicited a freeze. Was it the sylvan breeze or Martin's subordinates still pursuing me? My coastal region throbbed where I had impacted, and desiccated blood encrusted the abrasions on my upper and lower extremities. The flash drive felt impossibly ponderous in my pocket. I possessed no means of ascertaining its contents, whether Julia had been voracious, or even whether she remained sentient. The image of her countenance, frightened yet resolute, persisted in flashing through my consciousness. By midday, I discovered a thoroughfare. Narrow, rustic, yet unequivocally a thoroughfare. I followed it, remaining just inside the arboreal perimeter, until I discerned a petrol station. An elderly male behind the counter peered up in consternation as I entered. "Good heavens, what transpired with you?" he exclaimed. "Automobile malfunction." I lied. "May I utilize your telecommunication device? Mine is defunct." He propelled an antiquated landline across the counter. I dialed Clark's number from memory, supplicating her answer. "Who is this?" Her vocalization was strained when she responded. "It is Elena," I murmured. "I am at a petrol station off Highway 16. I require assistance." A silence ensued then. "Remain stationary. Refrain from communicating with any other individual. I shall arrive in 20 minutes. When Clark's nondescript vehicle arrived, I nearly succumbed with relief. She assisted me into the passenger seat, her countenance somber. "What in blazes were you contemplating?" she demanded as we accelerated away. "Do you possess any notion of your actions?" The motel chamber was ransacked subsequent to your departure, had you remained. Julia contacted me, I interrupted. She bestowed this upon me. I extracted the flash drive. She asserted it encompasses substantiation that Martin Reeves perpetrated homicide against Michael. Subsequently, male individuals arrived. Martin was among them. They discharged firearms at us. I evaded capture, but Julia... Clark's knuckles whitened on the steering mechanism. We discovered her remains an hour prior, a gunshot wound to the thoracic region. The intelligence impacted me like a tangible blow. Despite all, Julia had endeavored to perform the righteous act in the end, and it had exacted her life. We have been endeavoring to locate Martin Reeves since yesterday, Clark continued. He has vanished, absconded. Yet with this, she glanced at the flash drive. If your assertions are accurate, this could fracture the case comprehensively. We proceeded to a nondescript office edifice on the outskirts of town. Clark escorted me through a lateral entrance and up to a conference chamber where several individuals in suits were awaiting. I recognized the district attorney, Catherine Porter, from news reports. Mrs. Smith, Porter declared, her expression inscrutable. You have placed yourself in considerable jeopardy. I possess no alternative, I responded. Michael was assassinated. His perpetrator remains at large, and I possess substantiation. I positioned the flash drive on the table. For the subsequent hour, we listened to the recordings Julia had purloined. Martin's cultured vocalization was unmistakable as he deliberated with an associate regarding their resolution of the Smith predicament, employing a natural-appearing methodology that would not arouse suspicion. He mentioned a substance that would precipitate cardiac arrest, leaving no residual traces in conventional toxicological analyses. Yet there was additional content. Martin also deliberated payoffs to local officials, including Judge Harris, who had sanctioned the transfer of Michael's assets, and most shockingly, Police Chief Wilson. The chamber fell silent when that nomenclature was mentioned. Clark exchanged glances with Porter. The ramifications were evident. The malfeasance extended far beyond Margaret and Julia. It permeated the very institutions that were supposed to administer justice. We necessitate relocation to a secure location, Porter declared finally. Until we can effectuate arrests, you remain in jeopardy. No. The articulation emerged more forcefully than I intended. I am weary of concealment, of flight. Michael expended the final months of his existence endeavoring to expose verity. I shall not expend mine in obscurity. What precisely are you advocating? Clark inquired. A notion had been coalescing in my consciousness since listening to the recordings. A perilous notion, yet perhaps the sole means of eliciting Martin and his accomplices. I desire to issue a public declaration, I declared, pertaining to Michael's demise, pertaining to the inquiry. I desire to apprise them of my possession of substantiation, yet refrain from disclosing its precise nature. Engender their apprehension, engender their speculation regarding my knowledge and ignorance. That is exceedingly perilous, Porter objected. Yet it might prove efficacious, Clark declared slowly. If we orchestrate the narrative, establish the stage appropriately, it could flush them out. Following extensive deliberation, a strategy was formulated. I would deliver a press conference the subsequent day, with law enforcement monitoring every facet. I would disclose sufficient information to engender apprehension in Martin and his confederates, yet insufficient to reveal our comprehensive strategy. That night, in a hotel chamber with 2 officers stationed outside, I finally permitted myself to genuinely grieve for Michael, not solely for his demise, but for the months of deception he had endured, endeavoring to safeguard me while bringing his own kin to justice. He had expired in solitude, unable to share his burden with me, the individual who had pledged to stand by him through all. I curled up on the bed, clutching his wedding band, which I had retained on a chain encircling my neck. I shall conclude your undertaking, I murmured to the vacant chamber. I pledge. The subsequent morning, I stood before an array of microphones on the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed. Reporters vocalized inquiries. Behind me stood Clark, Porter, and several additional officials. Conspicuously absent was Police Chief Wilson. "My nomenclature is Elena Smith," I commenced, my vocalization more steadfast than I anticipated. 3 weeks prior, my spouse, Michael, was assassinated, not by natural causes as initially reported, but by individuals who desired to silence him due to his unearthing of their criminal endeavors. Murmurs rippled through the assembly of journalists. Michael had unearthed substantiation of illicit financial transactions and malfeasance within Smith Investments, orchestrated by his maternal figure, Margaret Smith, and others. When he threatened exposure, they perpetrated homicide. I paused, meeting the gaze of the cameras directly. I possess substantiation, identifying not solely those who decreed his assassination, but those who executed it. I possess recordings, fiscal records, and communications that implicate individuals at the most elevated echelons of both commerce and local governance. The murmurs intensified. To those culpable, you are cognizant of your identities. You believed silencing Michael would conclude this. You believed threatening me and endeavoring to deprive me of all would ensure my silence. You were mistaken. Verity is emerging, and there exists no refuge from it. As I retreated from the microphones, my mobile device vibrated with a text from an unfamiliar number. "You have committed a grave error. Inspect your hotel chamber." My blood congealed. I displayed the message to Clark. "It is a deception," she declared, yet her oculars betrayed her apprehension. We hastened back to the hotel, law enforcement officers swarming the edifice. My chamber had been undisturbed, yet affixed to the mirror was a photograph, recently captured, depicting me entering the courthouse with Clark. Upon it, inscribed in crimson ink, "I am nearer than your perception." "How did they infiltrate?" I murmured. "How did they ascertain my location?" Clark's countenance was somber. "They possess an individual on the interior, someone with access to our operation." The realization impacted us both concurrently. If Martin possessed confederates within law enforcement, no location was genuinely secure. The very individuals assigned to my protection could be reporting to him.